listeners. We have a lot of listeners, not just around the area. We also bring the show around the world, and it may not apply to a lot of places around the world, but let's look at the research in the UK. So some research that talks about there's a gender health gap inside and outside of the doctor's room, and according to the research, women's health is still not taken seriously, or serious as it could be, in the UK. So our guest today is going to be Cherry Healey, TV presenter and women's health advocate, and Dr. Rowan Connell, medical director and consultant gynaecologist at the Benenden Hospital, who's going to give us a bit of insight into the research. So welcome to the show. Great to have you on board. Can you give us a bit of insight into this sort of research?
Absolutely. So Benenden Health have conducted an amazing research campaign, and it's quite staggering, the results. They shouldn't surprise me, but they do. 72% of women don't know what the gender health gap is. They don't think it's a thing. And the reason that's a huge problem is that if you go to the doctor and you don't get believed, you get sent home, you get misdiagnosis, or you get a late diagnosis, and you're kind of, you're not getting the help that you need in the time that you need it, you might think you're the problem. You might think, oh, maybe I am whingy, maybe I'm making things up, maybe I am going crazy, maybe I don't have these symptoms that I'm telling people about. Whereas if you understand that the gender health gap is a very real thing, then you might go home and think, oh, hang on a second, actually, maybe that gender health gap is at play here. I'm going to go back and ask for a second opinion, a different doctor. You might research different health avenues, such as Benenden Health, which is a really affordable health service provider. So a lot of people won't go down, they'll stick with the NHS, they won't search alternative means because it can often be astronomically expensive, whereas this is really affordable. So that's why it's really important to talk about the gender health gap, because it will mean that so many more women will be empowered to ask for help when they might not have otherwise.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point you've made there, and I suppose, like you've mentioned, a lot of people may not be aware of it. There might be people out there that sort of don't, putting it bluntly, don't buy into it. They probably think, well, if they're a male, they've had certain experiences as well. I suppose that's why I want to find more about the research, to be fair, because I'm sure that there's plenty of people listening in, the sort of polarized world we live in today, who might be male, who are thinking, okay, well, I've had a negative experience myself, type thing, or maybe they don't bother going to get help, where they might, for various reasons. But I want to sort of find more about the research, and in terms of like what can we do if this is the case, that there is a health gap. Can you sort of shed light on the research to sort of, for our listeners to be more aware and educate as well?
Yeah, I think the point you make is valid, because last year what Benenden Health concentrated on was this time for a check-in, and that was for the whole male and female health. But when the research came out showing that the gender health gap was one of the widest in the G20, we've concentrated on that this year. And the problem is that all of us should be concentrating on our health more often. And we have found that after the pandemic and during the pandemic, people were either afraid to go and see the doctor or felt that they didn't want to worry them. But the problem is that 35% of women still won't go to see their doctor because they're embarrassed or they're nervous about going to see the doctor. They're worried that they may have something more serious than it actually is. But of course, when you delay going to see a health professional and getting a diagnosis, then you're actually potentially putting things on and making it much worse than it would have been ordinarily.
And just with that, I mean, sort of listening to that, what I find sort of quite interesting is, okay, you mentioned that maybe a woman might not feel comfortable going to GP, but so the research sort of says there is this sort of gap. Now, looking at that, is it down to maybe women not feeling comfortable, or is it down to what can the health system do if women aren't being cared for in the same way as men, as the research sort of stipulates?
I think it's clinical and patient. I think that women being educated about their own health, understand their own bodies, for example, being told about, hearing about the different symptoms for each of the different gynecological cancers. So when your friend is talking to you, you're having some fries and she's going, oh, I just feel a bit bloated and I feel like I just feel my appetite's gone. You go, oh, hang on a second, I think I know. I recognise that. So it's women helping women, it's being educated, but it's also the medical profession being aware that there is an unconscious bias to believe men more than believing women. So women have often been thought of as hysterical. You know, the Greek word for the womb is hysteria. And, you know, Rowan told me this earlier. How do you calm a woman down classically, historically? You give her a hysterectomy. So historically, we've had these messages seep through. And I think they've gone into the medical profession, into culture as a whole, that women aren't rational enough to talk about their bodies in a sane way. And so what that means is, and a woman only needs to have a negative experience once, twice in the medical world, where she starts to go, okay, I'm not actually going to be taken seriously here. I'm just not going to go. I'm not going to go and get checked up until it's catastrophic. I don't want to be a burden. Women often, you know, we care for everyone around us. We often forget about ourselves. So it's a mixture of things. It takes a long time to turn the ship around, but conversations like this are hugely helpful.
I agree. I think Cherry's point is valid, that as health professionals generally and the society generally, we always think that men go to see their doctors and health professionals much later, but actually this research by Benenden Health has shown that that's not strictly the case. It's the women who are avoiding going to see the GP or the health professional, and it's also the worry that they won't be taken seriously, and 60% said they wouldn't be taken seriously, and a third of women found that making a diagnosis was taking 2 or 3 or 4 years.
Now, it's an alarming statistic. Obviously, if 60-something percent feel that they're not being taken seriously. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously sort of concerning. That's for sure. You know, and I mean, you made some really good points there in terms of, like, you know, maybe social factors in terms of why, and perception and unconscious biases. So taking all that in consideration, and now the research that sort of come up with. The research that's identified specific areas, sort of going forward, what can employers do to help women in the workplace, and what needs to change to bring some sense of equality? So what would you say? What can...
I think listening to women, asking women questions, asking the women in your workforce, what can I do to better support you when you are going through these difficult things? Having really clear set policies that are there before a woman needs them, because if you have experienced something like pregnancy loss, baby loss, you're going through really acute menopause symptoms, that's actually the time that you're least able to advocate for yourself and stand up and say, hey everyone, this is what I need, because you're not in that place. You're not in that place emotionally or physically. So having those policies in place, making sure everyone in your workforce knows that they're there. Let's say if you are one of the few companies, unfortunately, that have a pregnancy loss policy, that the women know it before they need it. And also having alternative healthcare providers, you know, offering them solutions. So knowing about Benenden Health, knowing about how to give women advice in your workforce.
Yeah. We found that over 40% of women felt very uncomfortable talking about their health issues at work, and that they also found that there were lots of derogatory comments about them behind their backs, and those points are also very valid.
No, that's really interesting, like, points there in terms of the comments. But I suppose, like, you know, where are the comments coming from? Are they coming from other women? Are they coming from men, or a bit of both? In terms of what the sort of
I think about, I don't know about you, Ren, but I feel like it's a bit of both, because I think ageism is gender neutral. I had some products recently sent to me, and I thought they'd be perfect for a friend of mine, so I gave them to her. She looked and went, absolutely not, it's got the word menopause on it. I'm not having that in my bathroom. So this idea that you hit menopause and you have to go and live under a bridge with trolls, unfortunately, is men and women suffer from that. But it doesn't mean that at all. And it's the more women stand up and say, I'm perimenopausal and I'm absolutely great, thanks very much, I'm having a lovely time, I'm going on dates, I'm falling in love, I'm going on holiday, I'm thriving at work, and yes, I'm perimenopausal and menopausal. It's not the end. It's just a phase of life. It's a chapter of life. You're actually lucky if you get to experience it in some ways, because you've like made it that far. So I think things are changing, but if you hear anyone speak in a negative way about a woman's health, I hope you're the first, whoever's listening to this, be the first to stop them, because unfortunately, it's really toxic, and it spreads as well. It spreads like wildfire.
I'd agree with that.
No, absolutely, and I mean, I suppose it goes for anybody's health, man or woman, really. I mean, obviously we've got a lot of men listeners too. Probably thinking it's one of them, really. I mean, traditionally, really interesting. I mean, traditionally, like you made the point before, was made around sort of, we probably think that men are the ones who are going to sort of keep things under wraps, to be fair, but it's interesting to sort of see. But in terms of sort of being taken serious, I'm sure there's a lot of other factors too, in terms of maybe one's social status too, in terms of, the relationship they've got with the GP as well. So look, but this is an interesting variable, and it's really important that we get it out there, that's for sure. But sort of going forward, like what's the vision really? I mean, what can we start with? I'm sure there's a lot of things that need to change, but what's one step that, if we've got any listeners out there who are policymakers and I know we do have people that listen in who are policymakers, and what can they do? What's one thing they can do of many to start redressing the balance?
I think with the appointment of Dame Leslie Reagan as the health czar is a great start. I hope she gets the funding. Whichever government gets in, I hope they give her the funding that's been promised to her. She has some amazing suggestions, giving central hubs for women so that they can go and get access to healthcare rather than being all over the place. Companies like Benenden Health providing quick, easy access, which means that if you are doubting yourself, if you're questioning yourself, it's a phone call away, it's an online consultation away, and you get access to quicker diagnostics. So there are lots of things that are changing, which are pointing in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree, and I think what we're trying to do with Benenden Health, as other people, is to try to empower women to look after their own health. And over the past few years, as well as Cherry, there's been Davina McCall, who's been talking about the menopause, and that was a very brave thing for her to do, because she was this menopausal woman who then put herself out as a menopausal woman, and in the media and society generally, as Cherry said, you're deemed to be
kind of done. Like, go and live in a cupboard. There we go. There's the key. Enjoy.
That's brilliant that she did that.
Super brave. She didn't know at the time whether that was going to be the end of her career. People could have easily, it just takes a couple of commissioners, a couple of people in the corridors to be like, oh God, Davina talk about the menopause, gross. Oh no, right? That's, we'll this slightly kind of gets siphoned out. It's so brave of her, and no one was really talking about it at the time, so she didn't know how it was going to be received.
And all of you have done a wonderful thing, because we're now talking about the perimenopause, and certainly even 5 or 10 years ago, it wasn't really talked about. No. And if you had menopausal symptoms at the age of 40 or 45, no, it couldn't possibly be the menopause.
No, I'm just going crazy in that. Yeah, and I just now have anxiety.
Yeah, that's a really great point you've made there. In terms of, it makes some really good points. I think the point about the anxiety and sort of mental health as well, I think obviously it's multifactorial, and certainly, like, it's really important if anyone does manifest or start displaying symptoms of anxiety and changes in mood, that to be investigated, biologically as well as obviously psychologically too. And it's an important point you've made there, because sometimes it's dismissed as being a psychological issue, but I suppose that's another story for another day, when it could in fact be a medical thing that needs looked at. But I know, because at times getting the best of it, really kind to join us, and an important message. What I want to sort of stress to the audience listening is, in terms of how does this affect women's lives, and why as a society? Because the reality is it's going to affect everybody on some level, obviously the person who's experiencing directly, but also the knock-on effect that has in society as well. Because obviously, you mentioned before, I mean, I'm sort of fortunate enough to know and work with a lot of, great women who the work they do is invaluable, across a broad range of areas. And I couldn't imagine how we would function, without that work. But can you give us a bit of insight? What's the bigger picture? How much of an impact does this have in wider society?
It's huge, absolutely huge. I mean, if we're talking about, this is not even taking into account all the other things that women have to deal with, but let's talk just focusing on perimenopause and menopause. It affects your sex life, it affects your relationships, it affects your relationship with your children, your friends, your self-confidence. You might decide to leave work because you're brain fog. And what's so frustrating is that for lots of women, this is a very simple fix. You can try lifestyle changes. That's been amazing for me, and that's kind of sorted me out for now. If that stops working, I'll go on to HRT. I'll try that. You could just try HRT. You can then come off it if it doesn't suit you.
Absolutely.
There are some really quick fixes that can have huge impacts. If you are experiencing vaginal dryness, you don't want to have sex with your husband, that's going to affect you. For most people, it's going to affect your relationship. And that's really, especially if your children have grown up and you're both starting to get to the point where you can travel together and spend more time together, and suddenly you can't stand the sight of your husband, you don't want him anywhere near you, that's obviously going to have a negative effect. And it's worth looking after women for so many reasons.
Yeah, and I think it's very important, as you brought up, that a lot of these women, if we talk about the menopause, but we can talk about endometriosis for younger women as well. But if the Benenden Health research found that at least 42% of women said that their general health affected their professional life. And if we're talking about younger women with endometriosis and pain taking time off work, or we're talking about women who are at the peak of their professional careers, having to take time off work or actually leaving work because of menopausal symptoms, that has a massive impact on society generally.
Absolutely, and I'm sort of sensing there that some of the, obviously, endometriosis, menopause, it may not be visible to someone from the outside. I'm sure they are professional. Someone who's a medical professional obviously may be aware, but like for the person in general. Maybe communication. It's sort of can the workplace be made more user friendly in terms of being able to communicate if someone's comfortable communicating how they might feel at that time.
Well, I think that the research again that Benenden Health did showed that about 60% of business owners agreed that women have worse health issues than men. And so you can already see that there's some bias potentially against women, because again, the women we questioned said that they were having on average 9 days off from work every year. And that has again a huge impact on their work life and socially.
Absolutely. And just in terms of the research, is there a site, a website that can signpost our listeners to sort of go and read more?
Yeah, if you search for Benenden Health, there's so much information about women's health. And if you're a Benenden Health member, you can download the app. Tons and tons of useful information to help you if you need it.
And I think that's important as well, that searching on Dr. Google for things is not necessarily a good thing. You need to go to viable websites where the information is sensible, like the Women's Health Hub or the Menopause Hub from Benenden or the NHS websites.
Absolutely, that's a really, really great point. To be fair, there's a lot of good information on the internet, but sometimes some of it, obviously, questionable. To be fair, in terms of yourself, sort of being an advocate, Cherry, where can people sort of go to maybe follow your work if they're sort of interested? You're sort of leading by example. You're sort of out there,
You can follow me on Instagram, where I chat to my cats and I air fry things and I try on clothes and all sorts of shenanigans. I also talk about women's health a lot. I'm Cherry Healey, so it's at Cherry Healey on Instagram.
Brilliant.
And I just Cherry's so enthusiastic about this and really pushes it forward. And we said before, it's a shame that we have to deal with this. We should be talking about it all the time already. But somebody like Cherry coming on and pushing it forward and making it into the centre stage is got to be better for women's health in general.
It benefits me and my daughter, so I'm all for it, right?
Good.
Absolutely. No, it's a step in the right direction, that's for sure. If one person listening sort of maybe takes something on board and gets the right help, and it's job done. I want to thank you for your time. It's been great speaking to you both and really interesting and informative. And have a great day. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for your great questions.
Thanks
Appreciate it.